This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day, wherever you're listening from, and welcome. It's episode 485 of IAQ Radio, and it's Friday, November 17th, 2017. We're going to talk a little bit about what we learned at the Healthy Building Summit 2017 with three of the professionals who attended and spoke. We've got Nate Adams, we've got Carl Grimes, and we've got Eric Shapiro. At least we hope we'll have Carl here any moment, but we've definitely got Nate and we've got Eric on the line. But before we get started, we want to thank our marquee sponsors.
IAQ Radio marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Please be sure to thank our sponsors for their support of IAQ Radio when you inquire about their services or products. And we've got continuing education credits available. If you email me at joe.hughes@iaqtraining.com, we'll get you out a quiz. You can get continuing education credits for listening to the show and answering a couple questions. All right, before we get started, let's turn it over to the Z-Man for today's IAQ Radio trivia question.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
Congratulations go out to Vic Cafaro, Richmond, Virginia, for being the first person to identify November 10th, 1775, as important in military history because it was the founding of the United States Marine Corps. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, Friday, November 17, 2017, has been sponsored by Ideas, the solution chemistry company, creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Here is today's trivia question. On July 18th, 1955, a meeting of world leaders was held in Switzerland. What was that meeting called? Back to you, Joe.
Okay, I don't know that one off the top of my head, but let's talk a little bit. We've got Nate Adams, who's the founder of Energy Smart Home Performance. He's outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Energy Smart started out as an insulation contractor for existing homes, but has evolved into doing more comprehensive home performance retrofits. We're going to have Carl Grimes, the president the Hayward Score Director of Healthy Homes. He's with the Healthy Home Institute in Carmel, California. Prior to that, since 1987 until about 4 years ago, he was the president of Healthy Habitats, LLC in Denver, Colorado. He's also a past president at IAQA and past president of practice at ISIAQ, the International Society for Indoor Air Quality and Climate. And we've also got Eric Shapiro, a longtime building maintenance, environmental remediation, and environmental inspection professional. He's got a master's degree from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and he's also had extensive training and education in IAQ. He teaches indoor air quality approved training courses and helps us out quite a bit with the program and was a big part of the Healthy Building Summit. He's also been in many different aspects of the indoor environmental quality world. He's done mechanical systems cleaning, inspections, diagnostics. He's just a kind of jack of all trades. We look forward to talking to Eric. Okay, so let's see if we got Nate on the line. We'll start with you, Nate Adams. How are things going?
Very well, Joe. Happy to be here.
Welcome on board, buddy. Let's talk. If you would, give listeners a little bit of what your impression was after the Healthy Building Summit. We had you do a little presentation as a part of the summit, but we had, those that don't know, we probably had, 20 speakers over the 2.5 days and a lot of great presentations. What did we learn that we can pass on to others here today, Nate?
Well, first I'd say it's remarkable the mixture that you guys managed to put together from different disciplines. So this is the only event that I go to consistently now, because there's folks from the mold remediation industry, from disaster restoration industry, there's building scientists like myself. It's just this hugely broad array of people, and I really, really enjoy that, because sometimes it gets hard to learn new things when you get to a certain point in an industry, and learning things from adjacent industries oftentimes is where the next jumps come from. So that's what I really enjoy about the Healthy Building Summit. But that said, a couple things that come to mind for me were Sal DeLuca and May Dooley talking about electromagnetic fields. Because until now, all of the information that I've heard doesn't provide a framework around it. It just talks about them being bad, and generally it has come off, we'll say, not very professional in my mind, not very scientific. And I enjoyed hearing Sal talk about dirty electricity, and how that can create harmonics, and how some people are sensitized to that sort of thing. It's definitely not everyone, but some people are. And then he actually did live measurements in front of us, showing what some of the levels would be that were not good. And that, to me, was incredibly helpful, so that at least I could begin to wrap my head around that field instead of just thinking that it's a little bit crazy.
I'm glad you mentioned Sal LaDuca and May Dooley, and Martine Davis also presented during that segment. They're kind of from the building biology world, another group that we pulled in. And Sal, though, works full-time for an electric company, and he goes around and he knows his electricity. I mean, he knows it inside out, but he also does consulting in the building biology world. So I felt he was very interesting. A little controversial in that some people don't believe that electromagnetic fields and these issues that occur as potentially as the result of exposure, but certainly he could show you that there were issues with your electric, and that certainly it wouldn't hurt to fix them. I thought he was also a highlight, along with May Dooley. So we had May first kind of break it down and give the basics, and then Sal came in with some case studies, and then Martine had an interesting presentation on heat recovery ventilators. She's from Wisconsin, and some of the contamination she's been finding in the heat recovery ventilators, which I thought dovetailed nicely with the guest we had last week, Joe Nagin, who's also from that Wisconsin area, and he's been very involved with the building programs, the energy, working with the energy companies and the state to ensure that building code and the way they build in Wisconsin is using the latest building science information, but also working with the contractors to make sure they can do it. And he was kind of negative toward the heat recovery ventilators too, from a different perspective, but we can talk more about that as we go along. Let's bring in Eric Shapiro for a moment. Eric, I want you to say hello first, and then if there was a presentation that stood out in your mind, I'd like you to tell listeners about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Joe. First, and I'd like everybody to know, and I get no compensation from Joe Hughes to say this, but I've been, 4 or 5 years now going to this event, and every time I recommend somebody goes, I get nothing but raves that they didn't know it existed, and they wind up becoming repeat offenders at this event every year. So I agree with Nate. The concentration of information we get every year, better than any conference, any event that I've been to. So for future reference listeners, if you can attend for 2018, you should be there. That being said, there were a lot of good speakers there. I'm like Nate. I didn't know much about the electrical fields. Sal Duca did a great job. He also gave me some advice on the guitar amplifier, which was good as well. But controversial, interesting. But I got a better appreciation for that. I thought Tom Iacobellis, he had a really good, presentation with the dryer vents and their concerns. Everybody all the way around. And in your keynote speech, Fernandez, that was fascinating. I really can't highlight one particular person who was better than the other. There were just different facets of our industry being presented, and they were all good.
Cliff, let me let you jump in. You were also at the event, although you were tied up a good bit during the presentations. I don't know that all the listeners know, but we also do some research to practice while we're there, and Cliff was running a research project during the first day. But Cliff, let me let you jump in.
Well, thanks, Joe. I took the research. Well, you and I both take this research to practice motto very, very seriously. And this year I was fortunate, and I had the opportunity to conceive and develop an experiment, a research project, and I got to work with Tom Grillo. I got to work with Particles Plus. I got to work with Danny Hunt. And what we studied is there seems to be a lot of interest now in the mold remediation world about particulate and about using products to suppress particulate. And this has been a tactic that's been utilized in the asbestos abatement field for many, many years. And in that field, they typically use airless paint sprayers, and they wet down asbestos before they remove it, and they also mist while they're doing it. And this technology, or I guess this concept has now been introduced and is being promoted in mold remediation, and there are a number of products that are being advertised in order to do this. And what we wanted to do is see exactly what happens. And what we did is we created an experiment. We took a product that's touted as being highly effective in terms of removing airborne particulate. And what we did is we had two different rooms in which we tested two different products. We tested that product and then a product we just threw together out of the literature. And the rooms were set up identically. We used particle counters to measure what was going on before. We stirred up each one of these rooms in the same manner for about 5 minutes. We had a fog machine, which was set up on a pedestal, which was set up on a rotating Lazy Susan that worked electronically at 1 revolution per minute. And all this was precisely installed in the room in exactly the same place so that we could duplicate what was happening. We fogged each one of these rooms for 5 minutes with the products, and we ran the particle counters consistently while we were fogging, and then for a significant period of time afterwards. And I'm still waiting for the data. I have it on a disc. I'm not sure exactly how to interpret it yet at this point. And Tom and I have discussed a couple of times, and he's going to try to simplify it so that that I can understand it. But very, very cool. I think that data is going to tell us whether or not these things work or don't work, whether or not it makes sense or whether it doesn't make sense, or whether this is just something that people are hyping, within the industry with nothing behind it. So I think we'll have the answer to that question.
And that adds on to the other research we've been doing over the years on the use of different engineering controls for removal of particulate. And we've done a few shows on that. We can refer listeners back to what we've done on that, but that adds to it. And one of the other reasons we did that, there's those types of practices are also being touted for the mold sensitive people, that these use of these products helps to agglomerate the mold spores and drop them to the floor where they can be removed, etc. So I think it'll be very interesting. We'll probably get Tom on for a later show to talk about the results from that particular one. All right, let's go back to Nate Adams for a moment. Nate, I want to follow up on a comment that Eric made. Actually, he mentioned Tom Yacobelis's presentation. I was really excited about having Tom as a presenter, and then I think when people first saw what he was going to talk about, they may have thought, well, there's so many things Tom can talk about. Why this? I don't know. Did you get the same impression?
Well, which topic? The dryer vent?
The dryer vent one, yeah.
The hospital containment.
They were both very good, but the dryer vent discussion, I thought people probably thought, well, what do dryer vents have to do with indoor air quality, home performance, energy efficiency, etc.?
I'd say I really liked his presentation on that too. That I didn't realize that dryer vents are the number one cause of house fires when they get clogged up. But it does make sense because in our practice, we are always looking at dryer vents. So every audit I do, I take a picture of the dryer vents, and I recommend a different type of dryer vent that is easier to clean out and seals better. And so it was funny to see that research dovetail with what I do, and that's the part of the fun part of this conference is you're just constantly looking for tweaks to your practice or getting confirmation or figuring out if there's something you can improve. But I also found it really interesting that he said the worst offenders are ducts going through the attics in cold climates. I don't know if he talked a ton about it specifically, but you end up getting condensation on the ductwork because you have this warm, damp air going through, so you end up really clogging the dryer vents, and there's no way to see them because they come out the roof. So that's where a lot of the issues come from. And I found his whole discussion, just utterly fascinating. And at first I was like you, I kind of rolled my eyes, like, really? All the things you can talk about and you choose dryer vents?
Well, I knew ahead of time because I had seen him at a conference, and there was a guy there that I think we're going to get on a later show. They're actually selling dryer vent cleaning franchises, and they have a new piece of equipment they've developed to test the dryer vents and to make sure that they are flowing properly and they have the, that they've been cleaned, that they can confirm that once they're done, it's been cleaned and it's working properly. But you brought up a good point, and that's why I loved it. It was a building science issue, it was an indoor air quality issue, but it was also a restoration-related issue because they cause fires. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when a dryer vent goes through an attic, and particularly in a cold climate, first of all, they're not generally insulated very well, if at all. They're typically just, a piece of plastic flex duct, essentially, and when you put that warm, moist air up through there, obviously you're going to get some issues from that. He showed us some photos of dryer vents, especially the one in Washington, D.C. at the hotel where all the mayors and the governors and the big politicians stay, and they had, I can't remember how many garbage bags full of lint and other junk that they removed from that particular location because these folks have these big units, hotels. You got to imagine they're doing a lot of washing and drying, and they were just loaded with lint. They were having problems, couldn't figure out why, and then when they brought in Tom's company, in this case he's working for Belfour and the Ducts franchise, they showed him what the problem was, and it was just unbelievable how much was in that, how much lint, and essentially he said it turns into like a cake of mud almost, or almost like a plaster Paris once it dries. Yeah, it's like cement.
Cement, he said, yes, cement.
So it's very interesting.
He said there was 700 pounds of lint they removed, and how they figured it out was there's the fire inside the the dryer vent had been burning for 36 hours.
Wow. That's right. That's what it was. It was a fire again. Yeah. Amazing. But anyway, Eric, I wanted to let you comment again on anything from Tom's presentation that you took away.
Yeah, well, I was glad to see him do it because I started cleaning dryer vents 20 years ago with the mechanical cleaning when nobody could do it. And I said, boy, we're on to something because we were getting condominium and apartment complexes that were starting to get reductions in their insurance because they would put a maintenance program to yearly get the dryer vents cleaned. And I've also seen them just cause a lot of water and mold problems, especially when these flex lines are running through crawl spaces in attics. Not only do they condensate, but when water fills up, they bow the lines and nothing moves through. And just a whole lot of problems with them. And I'm glad to see Tom bring it up because it is definitely a niche market, and something for people to consider. And it's not just cleaning them, but go find a repairman, a mechanical contractor that wants to rerun new dryer lines that have been installed incorrectly. You can't find them. So I found it to be a potential opportunity, especially if you're dealing with apartment or condominium type buildings where you have a lot of units.
Well, they also create a tremendous negative pressure in the area where the dryer is, and I think a lot of indoor air quality professionals, they look at the dryer and they kind of check to see, okay, and maybe many don't necessarily check to see if it's clear, if it's open. I mean, a lot of times the flap doesn't open anymore for whatever reason. I've seen them that were still taped
Correct.
shut from shipping. So, yeah, it's a huge issue.
Well, the dryer, the central vacuum systems, all they are different forms of a negative energy. Other than that, that's exactly what they do. So they just suck air out of the house.
Yeah, I was really impressed. Hey, by the way, go ahead, Nate.
I was going to say, from a building science perspective, if you do combustion safety testing, you'll find that very, very often when the dryer is on, if they have a natural draft water heater, it causes backdrafting. In fact, I was just working with a client right now that's trying to decide whether to replace their water heater, and that's one of my arguments for it. Your system or your water heater is very close to failing under natural conditions with the backdraft test.
Yes.
And it's definitely failing when I turn the dryer on. And the dryer is likely to be on when the water heater's on because you just ran a load of laundry and you did a pull on the water heater. So the water heater is very likely to be running when the dryer is on. So it's a carbon monoxide and health issue as well. So it is funny how one little appliance touches so many different things.
And it's great when I've got people from different industries sharing this information. You guys look at it all the time because it's a part of the CAZ testing or combustion testing that home performance guys do. Not every indoor air quality person does that. So I think it really opened a lot of eyes. And I understand we've got Carl Grimes on now. Carl, do we have you on the line?
Yeah, you've got me finally. I forgot what time zone I was in.
Well,
I was going to come on the next hour.
As much as you travel, I understand, Carl. What we were doing is just going through with Nate and Eric and asking them what stood out, any particular presentation, any tip that you picked up that maybe we could pass along to listeners from the Healthy Building Summit?
Yeah, and to be quite honest, I've been on for a few minutes here now, and I've learned something already. Now, I've been doing this 30 years, okay, and I've already learned something. One is I just realized from the conversation, especially what Eric was saying, was that I'm one of those that I pay attention to lots of things. I'm very diligent. I dive deeper than the typical assessor does. But I've always basically discounted or ignored the clothes dryer. So Tom's presentation really opened my eyes, even on an individual residence. And then with not what Nate was saying, I had never considered that before, that when you turn the clothes dryer on, you've just finished a load of wash, and the hot water heater's probably running. And that was new to me, too. So just to emphasize your point, Joe, about different people in different parts of the industry and professions and research and everything else have different things to observations. I mean, it's really bringing it home to me right now.
I think another thing that I probably got more good feedback and compliments about the after event, where we have the hospitality suite open after we're done each day, and we all go to lunch together at the same time. And I got more compliments from people about the networking they did, and the ability to actually get to talk to someone after the presentations. By the way, Mark Hernandez, I got to thank him over and over. He stayed around for every other presentation and asked questions, and he was just tremendous in that he showed his interest for what the practitioners do, as well as what the researchers do. So I really enjoyed that as well. Carl, any other presentations that stand out in your mind that we could pass along to listeners?
Yeah, one I really wanted to mention, other than Mark Hernandez and the same comments that you just made, and he was not just hanging around. He was actively engaged up in the hospitality suite, talking to people and engaged with them, and I really like that. Research to practice is really important to him. The one I wanted to mention, though, was by your own Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, his presentation on cleaning air movers. And while the general public won't be using air movers, it points out something that is often forgotten, not so much in like a forced air system, but sometimes some of the wall units or in air conditioners, they'll go in and they'll clean the air pathway, but they don't clean the blower, they don't clean the fan, and then they think, well, it didn't do any good, I can't get it clean, I've got to put it away. No, you didn't clean the whole air pathway. And what Cliff was showing was what it takes to actually get the blower fan cage or the blower blades themselves clean in any kind of air mover. So what he as a practitioner did was a research project. So he took it the other way. He took practice to research rather than research to practice. I thought that was really awesome, comparing what the direction he and Mark Hernandez took. But the point about cleaning the blower blades, the fan blades, and any kind of air mover is something that I see ignored by even some of the professionals. So I thought that was really cool, and that's something that more people ought to know. Even if they can't do it themselves, they need to be aware of, hey, did you clean the fan itself? Did you clean the blower itself?
Yeah, where did that thing come from? It just was on 20 other restoration projects with sewage and everything else. Cliff, anything you'd like to add on that? Because I think others were very interested in your research there.
No, I mean, again, I've known Dr. Felicia Chancharolo since she was in high school. And, we kind of grew up together. And, as a microbiologist, it was something that we had chatted about. I was interested in it. I thought that it was, potentially a problem. And, I had the opportunity to work with her and two of her students with Carlow University. And it was just kind of neat, like laying it out. And, then we had the opportunity of having this serendipitous 4 air movers, 2 pairs of 2 different types that happened to have been left in a project that was sewage remediated for 4 months. So the whole thing really, really came together, and, the planets were aligned, and it was really a lot of fun. And, I think at some point, we hope to publish a paper on it and, get it peer reviewed and submitted. I'm just trying to figure out who to submit it to at this point, who would be interested in it. But it was really, really a lot of fun.
Cliff, in the
Hey,
interim.
Joe, this is Eric.
Go ahead, Eric.
Can I jump in on some
Sure.
of that? Is,
Sure.
one of the ideas, and over the years, you've always been research to practice, and I see it, a little bit changing every year at your event. And to go on what Carl says with Dr. Hernandez, every year I see we're getting this great information from the academics, from the research, but I'm seeing a disconnect from the field going back to them. And I even had a nice discussion with Dr. Hernandez about what can we do in the field to get you feedback on what you're finding academically. And so I'm glad, Carl mentioned that Dr. Hernandez stayed there. He was engaged because he really is interested to find out what's going on in the field, and how's that segueing in with his academic research, and maybe how might he modify his research because of the data that comes back from the field. So it's really important. I had it down as my second idea of what I pulled out of this, but it's now getting that back and forth flow, not just from the academics sending it to us, but we've got to have an avenue to give them feedback on what they've told us and to see if it's working in the field.
We're going to have to break in a moment, but I just want to, before we leave and come back, I want to mention that was the reason I really was excited about bringing Tom Yacobelis as a keynote. Is I look at Tom as a practice to research kind of guy, similar to Cliff. They see issues in the field, and then they go out and they figure out through experimentation and reproduction of the reproducibility of the results how to fix those issues. And Tom actually went to the level of, okay, we've got this issue in the field. Now we've got to go in the research lab, which is his garage or wherever. We've got to do the research on why these things are occurring in the field. But then he went a step further, which is what I was trying to really drive home with his presentation. He not only figured out the why and the how to fix these issues, he went and helped develop a standard for the industry to use when these dryer vent issues come up. And that to me was like the way to do it, the culmination of it. You go from something that's causing a problem in the field, you do the research on it, you figure it out, you get the appropriate association to work with you, and in this case it was NADCA, the National Air Duct Cleaners Association. You develop the standard based on the problem and the solutions to the problem, and then everybody in the industry hopefully will know the right way to work with this particular issue. That's what I was trying to do with Tom, and I think he was just tremendous and helped us out so much. Anyway, we're going to be back for the second half of our interview in 90 seconds, but before we do that, we've got to thank our sponsors and pay a few bills.
IAQ Radio would like to thank our association sponsors. The Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at IAQA.org. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor software technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them, wolfsense.com. IAQ marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Okay, we're back for the second half of our interview. We've got Nate Adams, we've got Carl Grimes, and we've got Eric Shapiro, and of course we've got the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. Guys, I want to just throw out a jump ball here. Before we left for the break, we were talking about practice to research instead of the other way around, and I wonder if anybody else wanted to throw out a comment on that. What do we still need to research from your experience in the field as practitioners?
Well, take a little different tack on that, Joe, if I could.
Carl, go ahead.
Something that I wanted to say before we went to break is that curiosity. The difference between the typical person in the field doing fantastic assessments and fantastic contractors' work is curiosity. Like you said, Tom notices something, and he goes from there. Cliff notices something, and he goes from there. Well, whether you follow up from it or not, if you have curiosity about what's going on in that building, you will see things, and you want to follow up on it, want to investigate. It's just that Tom and Cliff and others like them take it way beyond that. But just for an ordinary assessment, if you aren't curious and you just go in with the cookie-cutter approach of tab A to slot B, you're going to miss a lot of these important things, the observations that Eric and Nate commented on just before I came on the show here. So curiosity, I think, is a key factor in this that we ought to talk. We ought to encourage more in training and conversation presentations than just our daily work. Curiosity is a good word for me.
Great, Carl. That's a good comment. Hey, let me do this, guys. I want to throw out a couple of names and presentations and get you to comment back on what you took from it. I want to start with Ralph Moon, Dr. Ralph Moon. I've got my feelings on what he did and why I brought him on. I just wonder if any of you have anything you'd like to mention to listeners about Dr. Moon's presentation.
I found it fascinating. So he had two different pieces that he was talking about. So one of them was figuring out forensically how many days a given building material had been wet. And it was primarily by measuring how much it had expanded. And that was something I just haven't thought about. So this is, again, an adjacent piece to what I do that you just, I don't know exactly how I'll apply that, but it'll come up at some point when I look at a piece of MDF that's swollen, and I'll be able to have some idea how long that was wet.
And what's good to know, Nate, is that you now know there is research you can go to from Dr. Moon that you can pull up and review whenever that comes up and say, hey, based on the research Dr. Moon and his group did, it appears that MDF was wet for a week or 2 weeks, and this loss occurred 2 days ago. So was this a pre-existing condition or not? I think the things he was talking about are the big money ticket items that insurance companies are oftentimes worried about, as are consumers that have just had a flood. So I agree with you that that was a great presentation. Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I can't speak on Dr. Moon because I was up in our research rooms while he was doing his presentation.
Let me give people my thoughts on it real quick. Go ahead. Somebody else?
Yeah. I saw his presentation at a conference about a month or so before also, and two things about. One is the additional information and research from what he had 2 months before and what he had at your conference was he took leaps and bounds. So he's always working. The other one is just what you were talking about. There's science out there. He takes a situation in a building and gets behind the science behind it of what is happening and how to evaluate and so forth. So it's not just it's important that we understand that like MDF expands at different rates. It doesn't come back down, and all the mechanics of that. But there is a resource out there. Third quick point is we're used to looking at, some of us, me anyway, at insurance companies as sometimes the bad guys. These are the people that come in and say, no, it's not covered. We're not going to cover it. Here's a situation where Ralph and his people, his company, are going out for the defense side of legal cases, but when they find out the information of what's going on, the science behind it, they share it with everybody.
Yes, it's a beautiful. And let me describe for listeners the second part of Dr. Moon's presentation. Many of you may be familiar with this field technique that people use all the time, but they don't have anything to tie it back to. It's just kind of intuitive. They use, it could be a hammer, it could be a piece of metal, etc. And they do, and you're looking at a water loss situation, or even just, you do new construction and you're concerned that the ceramic tile or the marble or whatever, and he used about 7 different types of floor covering, isn't adhering properly to the substrate. And there's a tile tap method where you take a hammer, or in this case he used a ring, a metal ring, and they set up microphones, and they had the measurement capabilities to measure the amount of decibels, and they were able to pinpoint at what point a tile is partially connected or not connected at all, adhered to the substrate, and just by using this tapping method. But people have been doing it for years and years, but they never really had solid research to tie it back to that said, okay, if you tap marble with this particular 2-inch ring made of this type of metal, this is where the cutoff is going to be with respect to the sound you hear back for marble that is well adhered and marble that is not well adhered. So did the water damage cause the tile or ceramic or whatever it may be to become not properly adhered to the substrate? I just find that to be a really good example of practice to research, research to practice. Anybody want to add to that?
I think you covered it.
Let's go to the next one. I want to go back to Dr. Hernandez for a moment. I want to give a quick impression I had. First, I knew he would be excellent as our keynote, but one of the things I did not expect, I knew he would talk about the Instascope and the biofluorescence and looking at particles and how they biofluoresce or reflect light and being able to differentiate between bacteria and fungi. But I didn't expect him to tie in the micrometer technology to the other types of technologies he was looking at. And I don't know how many listeners are familiar with the micrometer. Lisa Rogers is someone that we'll have to get on the show in the near future. But I found that really interesting, that there was another kind of emerging, although it's been around for a long time, it's starting to become pretty widely accepted, at least in the research arena and with EPA, as a good method for evaluating fungi in the air, bacteria in the air, and I think they have methods for doing it on the surface. Carl, maybe you could add a little to that.
One of the things, I was asking Dr. Hernandez about that, and actually he was correcting me. I was saying something, he was correcting me, and he did this 2 or 3 times. He says, it's not just one method, it's several methods. And he said that what he emphasized to me was how important it was that it's not just, he's involved with Instascope of the science behind it and so forth, he said, but it's not just that. And it's micrometer also, and it's not just micrometer. You have to put all these things together because it's all a dynamic system. So you have to put it all together to see what you actually have. And so that was, I'm glad you brought that up, because I hadn't thought of it as something to say here today, but that was a real important correction that he made to me during our conversation. It's not just one thing.
And I'm glad I brought it up, because you just added to it. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I took his presentation there when he measured it is basically a cross-validating. I mean, the micrometer's been used for years on some Department of Defense contracts. It was used exclusively to verify, work that we did, and I think it's been validated from everything I know, and I think all these different methods are he's using to validate new technologies, and that's what I got from it, and so be it. It makes sense.
Let me throw out another presentation that I was really, really happy with, and that was Pete Consigli. Many of you know the restoration industry's global watchdog joins us regularly on the show. And Pete's got a mind like a steel trap. Once he is gone, I don't know who's going to. He's got to write this all down because he's got the restoration industry history down. I mean, he's got it. And then he also has been very involved with the indoor air quality world and the building science community because of the work he's done over the years at Building Science Summer Camp. So I asked Pete, look, Pete, there's a lot of really, really good research that's been put out over the years, and some of it's not on the internet, and some of it people may have overlooked, and the newer stuff is always sexier. Do me a favor, go back through history and look at what type of research is out there that maybe we're forgetting about. And Pete put together I just thought it was one of the best presentations I've seen in many, many years. I want to first thank him for that publicly. I've already thanked him privately, but I also wanted to see if you guys had any comments on that. Cliff?
It was eye-opening to me, I'll tell you that.
Just how much is actually out there and exists. And we can get some of this up for listeners in the blog. He gave us a great resource of where all this information is. Cliff, let me throw that out to you.
Thanks, Joe. One of the things I talked to Pete afterwards, because I unfortunately had to leave the event early to take him to the airport. And while we're in the car driving, we kind of came up with an idea that I really even haven't mentioned to you yet, but I'm going to lay it out there now. I thought we really needed to capture this information. And what we came up with was, rather than writing it down, I think getting an oral history probably makes more sense. And we came up with this idea, the Consigli Chronicles. And what we would do is perhaps use IAQ Radio as the mechanism for this, and maybe have one show a month, which is a Consigli Chronicle, kind of starting at the beginning. And I'm not sure how many months it will take. It might take 4 months or 6 hours or whatever to get through all this. But what do you think?
I love it, and I think it will fit. I don't know. We haven't really talked to listeners about this, but I noticed today's maybe a good day to mention this. We've seen a lot of people coming and going because the TalkShoe, we've been with TalkShoe for 10 years, and we've had our ups and downs with the technology here because, unfortunately, people get cut off or have trouble getting in, and I've seen it today, and I've got an email or two here about people that wanted to listen live and couldn't. So Cliff and I and our announcers, who also helps us with our marketing and advertising, is George Spike Reel. We're talking at, and my engineer here, John, you got to have faith, are looking at a solution for that. So I'm just going to kind of throw that out right now. We're not going to talk about what the solution is, but I think listeners can look forward to IAQ Radio taking it up a notch in 2018. Anyway, let me go back to some of these other presentations we had. There were a couple I wanted to mention. First, I want to mention that John Donnie was also there. John's the editor of the IICRC Journal, Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Journal. And I think John did a nice job of talking about the difficult task it is, especially in the cleaning and restoration world, to find good peer-reviewed papers that people are willing to submit to the peer review process in the first place, and then secondly to being distributed to the audience out there of the restoration world. I appreciated what John did. He did a nice job on presenting that information. I also want to mention Linda Wigington. Linda did a tremendous job on kind of filling us in on the research to practice, so the practice side of her reducing outdoor contaminants in indoor spaces program, and she went over some of the low-cost data monitoring instruments that are available out there, and I thought she did a real nice job with that. And Nate, can you chime in on that a bit, because I know that's something up your alley?
It is. It's funny. I was looking for a place to jump in. So
you got it.
A couple of things there. One of them was, I don't know if Linda fully understands how good the research is that she's doing. And talking about Mark Hernandez being very involved, it's like, this is amazing work that needs to be out there. And it was really fun to watch Linda just light up. I don't know that people have told her how good the work is that she's doing, because it really is fascinating work. And she's placing all of these monitors in people's homes. This is actually out in the field. So it's both research and practice. And then she's making various adjustments. So she's found that changing to more efficient motors, so ECM blower motors, and very good filters, and then running those in central forced air systems is really effective. And then taping a furnace filter, a 4-inch media filter, onto a standard window box fan, which you can build for $30 to $50, and you can get a really nice filter. And she could actually show how well they worked with actual readings. And I just found that absolutely fascinating.
And she's using
kudos to Linda.
She's using the Dylos, I believe, for the research, which, I don't mind putting out some names, because she looked at a lot of different low-cost monitors, and I believe they came out with the Dylos, but then she mentioned another one they're looking at now. Nate, do you recall the name on that one?
But of course, it is the Purple Air. Brett Singer at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs just gave a presentation. I can't remember the name of the conference. It's EBA, EEBA, and found that the Purple Air and the Foobot were both reasonably reliable, low-cost air quality monitors, which was really nice to have good, solid research on that, because obviously I'd written a pretty in-depth article, but I'm not a data scientist, so my work was not verifiable.
But you've also done and spoke about at our event a good bit of practical work with these low-cost monitors, and you were able to show our attendees, in particular in this case, some relative humidity data. Can you kind of give people the encapsulated overview of your presentation and what you found?
Sure. Well, there's really 2 points that I made. The first one is that everything is a proxy. So going back to what Dr. Hernandez's work is, he's trying to measure multiple things to verify that something that he thinks is happening is actually happening by looking for various ways to find reconciliation points or feedback loops. So that's a lot of what we use these products for in our practices, is to understand, did something work? And even though the data quality coming from them is just okay, we can leave multiple monitors in homes for a year without having a great deal of cost involved. And so it lets us learn a lot with proxies, because they're not perfect monitors, but when something really goes wrong, you have an idea. So that was the first point that I was trying to make. And the second point was connecting humidity and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. So one of the things that we've found is, on multiple occasions, even though we don't have particularly good control over humidity, or sometimes none, just the sheer act of dehumidification appears, and I could be wrong, but it appears to be reducing VOC output. And I just presented that data really as a question mark more than anything.
Thank you. It was very interesting, Nate. Let me go to Carl Grimes, because, Carl, I'd like you to do the same thing from your presentation. We always learn something new. I had asked Carl, because he's like the world traveler, Carl, I love your position. You get to go to every major conference and just soak up all that, all that education. So could you regurgitate some key points from your presentation for our listeners?
I guess the best quick summary of it is that I'll give you the not so good and then the very good. The not so good is the silo effect, that still organizations, that nationally and international organizations too, that are looking at a lot of the same things, like the built environment, They look at it from their particular point of view, and they either don't see other points of view or they dismiss it. I had one good friend of mine at another conference last week, Greenville, tell me, I was talking about this, and I said, well, for example, you on the engineering and the academic research side, and I saw some interesting things at the epidemiology conference, and the immediate response was, they don't do science. Okay? So it's a different way of looking at things. It's not the same, but it's that kind of dismissive attitude. It's not like me, so therefore it's not good. It's not what I do, so therefore it's not valid. And that's the bad side of it. The good side is that there are attempts to break through that. At the Healthy Buildings in Europe in July, there was a symposium by one of the lead researchers, Paolo Wargacki. He's the past president of ISIAQ, in fact. He had a group, more of a workshop, of how do we break out of the silos and how do we make contact with other groups and how do we communicate with them. So there's that going on. The epidemiology conference, for the very first time, this is bad news, good news, for the very first time they had a track on the built environment. The bad news is it's the very first time out of their, 60-year history. The good news is at least they had it. So that's an opening. And the other quick point, all of them are looking more now at not just the mechanical systems that go into buildings and the structures and the energy efficiency and all those nice, neat, fairly predictable measurements, but they're starting to include people in it. They haven't got to the point of looking at individual reaction and what they call the subjectivity of people, which is really the start of science, but at least they now can talk people without gagging. They can at least include people in their research and in their conversation. That's the two big takeaways I see is broad movement, nationally and also internationally.
Let me, we're running low on time, so I'm going to have to round this up for everyone here today. First, I want to thank our marquee sponsors at the event, which were Hayward Score, Carl's new haywardscore.com. Check it out. Particles Plus, we want to thank them for their marquee sponsorship and their help with the research. We'll have more about them in just a moment. Of course, John Don, who's been a tremendous supporter of the show over the years. Instascope, we're exhibitors. We had Instascope, FiberLock Technologies, Prism Analytical Technologies. It was great to see Cole from FiberLock and Alice D'Elia. Dr. D'Elia is just wonderful to have around anytime you're doing one of these events, and she's just a truly good person. True Tech Tools, Bill Spohn. Unfortunately, Bill jacked up his back and wasn't able to be with us, but we do want to put out the True Tech Tools, folks, and he had a real nice display of different tools available through the True Tech Tools website, AEML Laboratory, of course, and we also had U.S. Micro Solutions Laboratory, and then, of course, IAQ Radio, IAQ Training, and Ideas, and I hope I didn't leave anyone out. What I'd also like to do is quickly mention some of the other speakers we had and a quick comment on each. First, Mike McGinnis. I want to thank Mike for joining us. Mike did a really interesting presentation on risk communication and conflict resolution, resolving IEQ emergencies. He talked a lot about, risk and hazard, and also mentioned Dr. Peter Sandman from Yale, who has been a guest on the show. I really encourage people who are interested to go to the search button on IAQ Radio and put in Sandman, Sandman, and his formula is risk equal hazard times outrage. Very interesting, and Mike uses that as a part of his process for helping to resolve IEQ emergencies. Also want to thank Mike Bowden, attorney from Texas, did a really nice presentation on what happened after Harvey hit, using his mother's home actually as a tremendous example. Talked a little bit about what insurance-related issues are happening down there. That was another great presentation. Of course, Cole Stanton did a nice job for us as well from FiberLock. Joe Medosh, I want to make sure I mention Joe. Joe's tremendous. He's kind of a sort of an indoor air quality guy. He got a long indoor air quality background, but he's also a home performance guy, but he's also a tools guy. So we had Joe talk about his background and talk to folks about how those things can come together. I think he did a great job for our listeners. Dr. Chanciarulu, who Cliff mentioned, talked about the microbiology of sewage. Herb Lehman did a nice job with Legionnaire and discussion of Legionnaire and talking about the New York State regulation and how people are looking at the potential for regulation in other areas when it comes to Legionnaire, an emerging issue in the indoor air quality world. Of course, Tom Grillo for Particles Plus. A lot of people, he was on Saturday, so after a lot of people left, but he summarized a lot of the data that Cliff and he had worked on, and our other guy, Danny, Special Forces Hunt. I want to make sure I thank Danny for helping with the research. And finally, the last one, the guy I used to try and pull this all together, and I don't think most people would, unless you saw him do it, I don't think most people even would realize why or how I did this, but I brought in a gentleman by the name of Todd Usher. Todd is a builder out of Greenville, South Carolina, who I met in May in a class in Greenville, and I was just so impressed with what he's doing with respect to taking research and putting it into practice in building new energy efficient, these are net zero ready homes in the Greenville, South Carolina market. And we actually went out and we did some measurements with him with the class in these homes. So we kind of took the research from the EPA and Department of Energy and other groups, the builders associations, and went through the nuts and bolts of how you build one of these more efficient but also better indoor air quality homes. And I thought Todd did a really nice job of wrapping that all up, and I see I'm running a little low on time. Does anybody have a final comment they'd like to throw in here?
I just think you outdid yourself, Joe. You and Cliff, but your conferences have been getting better and better, and this was awesome. I can't wait till next year.
Well, thank you for
Agreed.
that, Carl. Eric, same with you.
Ditto.
Nate, I'm so happy. Nate, I know you've gone to a million conferences over the years, and when you sent me a little email saying this is the only one I'm going to go to on a regular basis and have been for the past few years, really made me feel good, so I appreciate that. Of course, I also appreciate the help of the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. People always think of your presentations as one of the highlights of the event, Cliff, and this year wasn't any different. So thank you so much for that. And I want to say thanks to our engineer, John. You got to have faith. He was our cameraman at the event, helped me pull a lot of this together. I never could have done it without him. And, of course, most importantly, Dottie Hughes, IAQ Dottie, she was the rock that stood behind me while I was pulling all this together and put up with the insanity for the month or two before the event. And I hope I didn't leave anybody out. But this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guests, Carl Grimes, Nate Adams, Eric Shapiro, of course, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. John, you got to have faith at the controls. Nice group of listeners on today, our growing group of loyal listeners. We will be back in 2 weeks from today. We're going to take off the Thanksgiving holiday, which I'm sure most of you will be off on that Friday after Thanksgiving. But 2 weeks from today, we'll be back with the next episode of IAQ Radio.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.